Well, today I thought I'd do something different, at least from what I normally do. And that's tell a story of one of the Buddha's early disciples. And there's different versions of these stories generally. Normally the earlier scriptures, the earlier suttas, they're quite stripped back and basic. And the quotes or the parts of the story that I read from will be from that. But as the tradition evolved, there's also elaborations of the story. Yeah, so I'm going to stick to the more elaborate version of the story. But I don't think it means it's less true. Sometimes these elaborations have kind of a lot of food for thought, things to reflect on. And they also give a backstory to this particular disciple of the Buddha's. So, yeah. So we can cast our mind back 2,500 years ago to an area which is these days northern India. Yeah, although in those days there wasn't India, there wasn't a word called India, there wasn't a country. There was different kingdoms, especially in northern India. So you had Kosala, Magadha, amongst others, and there were bustling cities, towns, villages, and real forest, genuine forest full of all sorts of interesting creatures. Yeah, and the culture at the time was, you could say the kind of the passion, the cutting edge of the culture was kind of, people were really interested in consciousness, in what we call spiritual issues, which to them was the most important thing in the world. Yeah, the same way that we kind of are obsessed with technology and worshipping at the Temple of Apple, they were kind of interested in consciousness. So that was the kind of backdrop to the culture. And within the kingdom of Kosala, there was a young boy called Ahimsaka, which means something like harmless, non-harm, harmless. Yeah, that was his name. And he was a bright young boy, intelligent, and his parents decided to send him, when he was old enough, to a place called Taxila, which was a center of learning in northern India. And so he went there at the right time. I was very excited, and found a good teacher. Yeah, and immediately the teacher liked him. He thought, he was excited by Ahimsaka's presence. Ahimsaka was very enthusiastic, plugged in, had a natural ability, and the teacher responded. So they had a very good relationship. Yeah, and Ahimsaka was growing and shining. And as normally happens when people shine, some people are not too happy about that. So some of the other students began to get a bit jealous. Yeah? They began to get a bit annoyed that Ahimsaka was getting all the spotlight, was so loved. Yeah, so people loved him. They loved him around. The teacher was very much giving him all the attention, and they got fed up. So his fellow students decided to poison the water. So they began talking to the teacher about Ahimsaka, making up stories, gossiping about him, saying things he'd done or hadn't done probably. And the teacher he just brushed it off. He wasn't really interested. But this carried on for weeks and weeks and months, and they kept poisoning the water. And then they thought, the teacher has a young wife, and we can use this in our favor. So they split into different camps, and they started saying, Ahimsaka's interested in your wife. Actually, Ahimsaka's interested in your job. And the teacher began to get corrupted. He began to see Ahimsaka in a different way, and eventually turned on him, yeah, and I felt like he had to get rid of him. So he figured out a way to get rid of him, which was to give him an impossible task, yeah. And I'm not quite sure what they were learning in this place. It was Brahminical, I don't know. Some people say maybe tantric kind of teaching, but the task that Ahimsaka's teacher gave him was to go and bring back 100 fingers. Yeah, He had to kill 100 people and bring back 100 fingers, and then he would be spiritually empowered. Yeah? And Ahimsaka wasn't very happy about this, his new turn of learning and teaching, and pleaded with the teacher not to do this. But in the end, he was very confused. He was a long way away from his family. He was being, in a way, betrayed. He was not sure what to do. And in the end, he decided to go with this, because either if he stayed, he could stay if he got the 100 fingers, and if he didn't get the 100 fingers, he'd have to leave, so the teacher would be free of him either way. So that's the backstory. Yeah? And it's also worth remembering that in those days, human sacrifice was no big deal. Yeah? It was happening all over the world. People were killing other humans to get the crops to grow and the rain to come, so it was normal. Yeah, so that's not anyway. So yeah, so Ahimsaka gets his sword and his spear and his shield and his bow and arrows and his knife, and he goes by himself into the dark forests surrounding the area. Yeah. And he's there by himself in the forest with all his weapons and all his stuff, waiting for people. And so someone comes by, but he can't do it. So they go by, and then he charges himself. You know how we can work ourselves up when we really want to do something? He works himself up, and the next villager came by, and he just does it. And he strikes the villager down and cuts his finger off, and threads it on a necklace, a piece of string around his neck, so the crows don't eat the fingers. So he has his first finger on his neck. It's worth saying, which I find quite interesting, I know I won't ask, but I imagine no one here has killed anyone, yeah? But I've met quite a few people that have killed people, whether friends or family, either soldiers or in gang-related situations. And they all say, once you cross that threshold and you actually take a life, it's quite easy to do it again. Yeah? So it's worth bearing that in mind. Once it's done once, you can do it. It seems impossible to me. I can't quite believe that, but apparently that's how it works. So Ahimsaka, well, he's not Ahimsaka anymore, is he? Not exactly harmless, but he just goes about killing people. So villagers would walk in, he'd kill them, they'd come in pairs, they'd get scared, he'd kill them, and he was just killing, and it was like a demon in this forest. Yeah? And maybe people who'd escaped or seen him come into their village at night and kill people, they'd seen him with a necklace of fingers around his neck, and he got the name Angulimala. Yeah? So Anguli, I'm assuming, means finger, and Mala means necklace. So there was a demon living in the forest called Angulimala. Yeah? And he was terrorizing the countryside. So there was a terrible atmosphere, this kind of darkness. The forest had become a place where you just wouldn't go, and they were being kind of hunted. So into this walks the Buddha. The Buddha's walking along. So after the Buddha attained enlightenment, he spent the rest of his life basically walking around northern India, just communicating with people, teaching people, and eventually gathered a large number of disciples. So that was what he did. If it wasn't the rainy season and he wasn't in retreat by himself or with disciples meditating, he'd be walking. And he just so happened to be walking through this area. And he was walking straight into the forest where Angulimala was. And the villagers were obviously not very happy about this. And so they said to him, "Don't go along that road, contemplative, for on that road is Angulimala, brutal, bloody-handed, devoted to killing and slaying, showing no mercy to living beings. He has turned villages into non-villages, towns into non-towns, settled countryside into unsettled countryside. Having repeatedly killed human beings, he wears a garland made of fingers. Groups of 10, 20, 30 and 40 men have gone along that road, and even they have fallen into Angulimala's hands." When this was said, the Blessed One kept going in silence. So the Buddha wasn't scared. Yeah? one of the Buddha's epitaphs, one of the Buddha's names is the fearless one, yeah? The Buddha said to be fearless. So he didn't turn back, and the villagers kept pleading with him, but he kept on walking. And it's worth remembering, actually, that the Buddha himself had spent much of his life, and especially the period leading to his enlightenment, in forests, in dark forests especially, and had encountered his own darkness to probably the deepest extent possible. And there was no fear, and he wasn't scared of Angulimala. So he kept walking into the forest. He was walking along this path, and I think legend has it, Angulimala had 99 fingers, and he needed one more finger. So he thought, oh wow, fantastic, it's my lucky day. And he saw the Buddha coming along in his robes, and he said, to himself, he said, isn't it amazing? Isn't it astounding? Groups of 10, 20, 30 and 40 men have gone along this road, and even they have fallen into my hands. And yet now this contemplative comes attacking, as it were, alone and without a companion. Why don't I kill him? So Angulimala picks up his sword and his shield and his bow and arrow and starts following the Buddha. And the Buddha's just walking at his normal, mindful pace, steady, steady, steady. And Angulimala can't catch him, so he speeds up, he still can't catch him, and he's sprinting, and he's going faster and faster and faster, and he still can't catch the Buddha. And he says, isn't it amazing? Isn't it astounding? In the past I've chased and seized even a swift-running elephant, a swift-running horse, a swift-running chariot, a swift-running deer. But now, even though I'm running with all my might, I can't catch up with this contemplative walking at a normal pace. So he gets really annoyed, and he ends up shouting at the Buddha, stop. Yeah, as if you're going to stop for Angulimala, but he shouts, stop. And the Buddha says, I have stopped, Angulimala, you stop. So this completely confuses Angulimala. He's in a slightly kind of, he's obviously having an interaction that he's never had before, and he's a bit lost with this. But he thinks to himself, these Shakyan contemplatives are speakers of truth. And yet this contemplative, even while walking, says, I have stopped. Angulimala, you stop. Why don't I question him? So then it goes into a whole thing where basically the Buddha says, I have stopped Angulimala, once and for all, having cast off violence towards all living beings. You, though, are unrestrained towards beings. That's how I've stopped and you haven't. So I think in order for this to make sense, one has to kind of evoke the Buddha, because obviously it wasn't just a discussion. You don't have someone who's charged with violence on a rampage, murdering people, just meeting somebody who hears a clever line about them stopping and them not stopping, and the metaphors, and suddenly goes, oh wow. So it's obviously his interaction, his experience of the Buddha would have been what would be changing things for Angulimala. So Angulimala, in a certain way, is become an embodiment of darkness. Yeah, he's become an embodiment of the darker side of human nature. And I was thinking on this, and I thought, in the Buddha's own story, the Buddha's actually been to that darkness and through that darkness and beyond that darkness. So he knows the darkness better than Angulimala himself. There's a whole story about the Buddha's enlightenment, which gets mythologized and told in a story form about the Buddha being attacked by demons and them firing arrows at him and them turning into flowers. So you can take that as a nice, simple story, or you can take that as somebody who has really their psyche so expanded that they experience everything, all their demonic sides, angelic sides, and then something beyond that still. So that's who Angulimala's meeting. He's not meeting someone clever, someone... Fearlessness, in order to be fearless, it's not about being clever, is it? There's the whole, which I find really inspiring, the whole forest renunciant, I think is in Thailand, they follow tiger trails, or at least they used to follow tiger trails, where you would test your love, basically. You know, you test your metta, so you'd follow a tiger into a forest, or you'd follow a trail, and when it's there, if you're not literally fearless, you can't trick yourself, it will probably eat you because it will think, dinner. But if you don't smell of fear, you're like a strange vegetable or you're a strange tree, or they can't, what's the point? You're not really scared. So I imagine it's the same thing with the Buddha. There's no fear there. He's engaged and he's talking to this person with, I would say with love still. So this has a huge effect on Angulimala. Something happens. Yeah, it's not, like I say, it's not an idea. He has a turning about in his consciousness, and something wakes up again. Perhaps maybe something that had got covered over by all his kind of madness and killing. Something had kind of woken up in him. The Buddha had kind of woken up his heart, his kind of his humanity, even. Yeah. And so Angulimala throws all his weapons away. And he says he will go about abandoning evil. So something's happened to him, he's seen something, and something switched in him. And funnily enough, when I was reading this, it reminded me of a film I saw about 10 years ago called, I think it was called The Act of Killing. And it was about the militias in Indonesia. And I think Wim Wenders produced it. But they followed these people that had basically been exterminating the local Chinese population, communists, or people that just had a communist affiliation. They basically exterminated all these people, and then they were national heroes. Yeah, so there wasn't like in this country a reckoning and a kind of repentance or anything like this. They were celebrated as heroes. Yeah. So they were fine talking about what they were doing. It was quite extraordinary. This one character, the chief executioner, had devised a special way to kill the maximum number of these people in the most efficient way. And he was showing the cameraman around saying, oh yeah, there's kind of, there was so much blood, we had to sweep it all away, and we had this special technique. And just right at because the cameraman, he'd made friends with this person, yeah? And he just, one little thing at the end, he said to him, so don't you feel, how do you feel about this? He was like, He'd never even thought about that because everyone had celebrated him. And he began gagging. He was like, what? Completely involuntarily for himself, obviously. And you could see it surprised him. But like what he'd done suddenly became apparent to him, and he started vomiting, like dry vomiting, and was really confused afterwards. I thought, wow, it's like the seed of his conscience was beginning to wake up, and it was manifesting in a kind of physical response. So, in a way, even though it seems unbelievable that if you had killed so many people, you could regain your humanity and regain your sense of conscience, perhaps it is possible. So, well, in this case, it was possible. So Angulimala basically became a disciple of the Buddha. And so the Buddha didn't just forgive him and love him and say, you're okay. The Buddha offered him a path, yeah, which what in Buddhism is called going for refuge. Yeah? He offered him a path to become one of his disciples and said, you can go for refuge with me. And that's what Angulimala did. He took on the robes, shaved his head, and followed the Buddha as a new life. And so he was with the Buddha. He became the Buddha's attendant. I'm not really sure what that entails. I'm sure it's slightly PR. The Buddha had a lot of people visiting him and everything. But he was just around the Buddha. Yeah? So the teaching would have been the Buddha's presence himself. It wouldn't have necessarily been teaching, although I'm sure the Buddha did teach him in terms of method, but he was just with the Buddha and safe with him and changing with him. Yeah? So, both of them began wandering together, and they went to a place called Savatthi. Yeah? Savatthi is quite a famous place in the Buddhist tradition. And there was loads of people there. There was a huge gathering of people. Loads of soldiers, loads of elephants, horses, people with swords, spears. And the Buddha was friends with the king, King Pasenadi, and asks him what's going on. He said, has someone in the neighbouring kingdom upset you or provoked you? Is this why you're going out with all these horses and elephants? And King Pasenadi says, no, Lord. The king of Magadha hasn't provoked me, nor have the Lichavis of Vasali, nor has some other hostile king. There is a bandit in my realm, Lord, named Angulimala, brutal, bloody-handed, devoted to killing and slaying, showing no mercy to living beings. He has turned villages into non-villages, towns into non-towns, settled countryside into unsettled countryside. Having repeatedly killed human beings, he wears a garland made of fingers. I am going to stamp him out. So he means business. So he's ready. And then the Buddha says, Great King, suppose you were to see Angulimala with his hair and beard shaved off, wearing the ochre robe, having gone forth from the home life into homelessness, refraining from killing living beings, refraining from taking what is not giving, refraining from telling lies, living the holy life on 1 meal a day, virtuous and of fine character, what would you say to him? We would bow down to him, Lord, or rise up to greet him, or offer him a seat, or offer him robes, alms food, lodgings, or medicals for curing illnesses, or we would arrange a lawful guard, protection or defense. But how could there be such virtue and restraint in such an unvirtuous and evil character? Then the Buddha points to Angulimala and says, that great king is Angulimala. Then the king Pasenadi was frightened, terrified, his hair standing on end. So the Blessed One, sensing the king's fear and hair-raising awe, said to him, Don't be afraid, great king, don't be afraid. He poses no danger to you. So yeah, the king is shocked, to say the least. But then the king, which is very interesting, goes over to Angulimala with respect. So that just in a way tells you how much respect the king had for the Buddha. The Buddha wasn't celebrated as being the richest person in the world, the most popular person in the world, but he was someone that a king like Pasenadi had just complete respect for. Yeah? Even if that meant the Buddha had introduced someone who was a serial killer into his ranks and said he was transformed, then the king would believe him and say, okay, he's transformed. So the king goes over to him and says to him, I will be responsible for your alms, food, lodgings and medicals during this, for curing illnesses. But then Angulimala's response is quite interesting. He doesn't grovel. He doesn't say, oh, thank you, king. He's not full of... he hasn't been destroyed. He's actually got his own dignity and says to him, enough, great king. My triple robe is complete. So he was happy just being with the Buddha in the wilderness, yeah? And they call him a wilderness dweller. So he was in the forest, and he stays in the forest, but stays transformed, and he doesn't need any special treatment. He doesn't need any special robes, any special food, anything like this. He's content. He's found a way to transform his life and to come out of this darkness he's been in. The king then is kind of stunned, yeah, and says to the Buddha, I don't know what you've done, but this is amazing. I don't know how you did that, and starts talking about people can't even be tamed with blunt weapons or swords, and yet somehow you managed to tame Angulimala. Yeah. So Angulimala and the Buddha, they set off together, having been kind of, given the okay by the king as well, and the king goes his own way with his soldiers and everyone else. And so they have a kind of regular rhythm, the regular rhythm of the Buddha and his disciples, which is, they'd meditate, obviously, and they'd just be together in the forest, but once a day they'd go on what's called a begging round or an alms round. So at that time the society at that time was very favourable and helpful towards people that were devoted to living a spiritual life, that were exploring. They would support that. I'm not sure how much luck we'd have around here. You're knocking on people's doors asking for food, saying we're practicing Buddhism, and probably not too much. But in those days, the community were generally very supportive. Yeah, so you go door to door with your bowl. They'd finish cooking, they'd lop in some rice, then you go to the next door, maybe you'd get like a piece of bone and a bit of lamb or something. The next door they'd put in some sweets, then you'd get some yogurt and some tea, and you'd have a bowl of slop, and that would be your dinner. You'd eat that if you were lucky. Yeah, so that would be your dinner. So Angulimala one morning went into Savatthi begging, and as he was going around his rounds, he came across a young woman in childbirth, really struggling, having a very difficult birth and a lot of pain. Really struggling. And this had a huge effect on Angulimala. So Angulimala came back to the Buddha after his meal and told the Buddha about what he'd seen. And he says, how tormented are living beings? How tormented are living beings? So he's very much struck by what he's just seen. Yeah. And so the Buddha says to him to go back to her and say to her, "Sister, since I was born, I cannot recall intentionally killing a living being. Through this truth, may there be well-being for you and your baby." And Angulimala says, "Well, wouldn't that be a lie? I have intentionally killed many living beings." So the Buddha says, "In that case, Angulimala, go to that woman and on arrival to her, say, 'Sister, since I have been born in the noble birth, I do not recall intentionally killing a living being. Through this truth, may there be well-being for you and your baby.'" So apparently this is a kind of prayer or mantra that has been said throughout years after this incident in Buddhist lands, when women are giving birth. It would become like this story, I guess, would come to mind. Angulimala would come to mind, and it would be used as a prayer. So Angulimala goes back to this woman and says this, and it calms her and eases her pain and discomfort. And it's quite interesting. Apparently it's something to do with truth speaking. I think, how do you say it? Sakavacha? I can't remember. But it's basically there's something powerful about speaking the truth, especially from a place of love. And you just speak the truth and it has a calming effect. And, well, it has a huge effect on her. Yeah, she calms down, she's with this. And I found this particular part of the story very moving. And still do. And it's a kind of turning point for Angulimala as well. He's someone who's killed a lot of people. He's been on the other end of it. He's been bringing death and destruction to the world, and then finds himself on the complete opposite end with life coming into the world, both bloody, obviously. But and I was thinking it's quite something, isn't it, to make people feel safe and calm. That's a huge thing. And also, I think sometimes you can go through all sorts of things and still have the ability to make someone feel safe. I was thinking about my granddad, for example. He was in the war, and he was with a kind of, I don't know what you call them, commandos, yeah, like a squadron. And he did a lot of killing. And I remember him, when you're a kid, you talk to your grandparents in a different way, don't you? It's like, my dad didn't know any of his war stories because he was like a teenager and in his 20s. And it's a bit weird, it's a bit heavy. But when you're like 7 or 8, and you're fascinated listening to these things, like my granddad would just tell me everything, like probably things they shouldn't have told me, but he would just tell me everything. But he told me, there was a guard, and it was like at night and a secret thing. And he put his hand around the guard's throat and cut his throat and put him on the floor. And then he looked at this basically boy. Yeah, he was like 17 or 18, this beautiful boy, this young German boy. And I was like, wow. But then also my granddad was one of the kindest people in the world. So it's a very strange thing. So I thought about that. And I thought also what it takes to make someone feel at ease when they're in pain. I was thinking about myself. I had an operation a few years ago, and it was so horrible. I've talked about it enough, so I won't go into it more. But actually, I will say, in relation to childbirth, it was like in a part of the body that you don't want an operation on, yeah? And it was agony, straight up agony. And I was losing my marbles a bit. I wasn't sleeping. This went on for like 2 weeks, and I thought, wow, I'm not getting any better. So as you do, you go on these forums. And there was women who'd given birth to a number of children, and said each time she went to the toilet, it was the same as giving birth. So I was just like, great. So it's just like giving birth every day, yeah. And it was horrific. And I think the only thing that really helped was my friends. So I was in this place where I used to live called Padmaloka, and there's a friend of mine called Padmasagwa and a guy called Pranya Hridaya, And they were just, and Padmabhadra as well actually, they were just so kind and just steady and calm, and I felt safe. And you feel sometimes that even if, not that I really thought this at all, but even if maybe you're going to die, sometimes it seems like people, you just want someone to know and to be with you, to not be alone in that situation, yeah? So, I don't know, I just found this particular part of the story very moving. That there's been like a complete transformation in Angulimala. And also I think sometimes people that have been involved in these things, like I have friends of mine that have been involved in all kind of madness and been to jail for long periods of time, sometimes I do get the feeling with them that they're more on the ball than most of us in terms of ethics once they've turned the corner, because they know where it goes. I have a friend of mine who's been involved in serious things, and he's an order member now, and he's super careful, like in a way that I feel a bit ashamed by sometimes. He's really like, I don't know, he's very ethically careful, not in an uptight way, I have to say. He's not like weird, but just very ethical. So I think sometimes when you've been doing things, the worst things you can imagine, you kind of, you know, you don't want that anymore. You really don't want that anymore. You don't even entertain that kind of stuff. So it can be very sobering being around people like this, yeah? So after this, maybe something happened with Angulimala, you know, after this episode, and he takes himself into the forest and obviously really makes effort, and he's really practicing. And he basically attains enlightenment. Yeah, he attains awakening. He says, birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for the sake of this world. And so Angulimala becomes an arahant, which is essentially one of the Buddha's enlightened disciples. So he's done it. Yeah, he's completed a kind of, saying that obviously is very glib. You've got one sentence, but you've got a similar situation to the Buddha. He's taken himself into the forest after this episode with this woman giving birth, and he's really given everything to the spiritual life and to practice and to conclusively moving beyond hatred, you could say, quite simply. So there's no more hatred in him, no more aversion. He's kind of conquered that, yeah? So then, sometime afterwards, Angulimala goes on his alms round again. He goes on his begging round, goes back to a village, different village, walking around asking for food. And one of the villagers recognize him, yeah? But they recognize him not from a previous life, you could say. Yeah? Maybe they were in a village when he was murdering people, maybe they'd escaped from him. And so they pick up a rock and they throw it at him and it hits him in the head. And then someone else does, and the whole village turn on him and attack him and beat him, throwing rocks on him, ripping his robes to shreds. He's covered in blood. And it says, so the venerable Angulimala, head broken open and dripping with blood, his bowl broken and his outer robe ripped to shreds, went to the Blessed One. The Blessed One saw him coming from afar and seeing him said, bear it, Brahmin, bear it. The fruit of karma that would have burned you in hell for many years, many hundreds of years, many thousands of years, you are now experiencing in the here and now. So that's quite something. So, you know, he doesn't just comfort him or console him. He gives him something that's really important in Buddhism, and that's forbearance. Sometimes you have to bear things, don't you? Sometimes things can't be fixed, things are broken. So Angulimala's coming to him with his head broken open, his robes torn to shreds, and the Buddha says to him, bear it, yeah? Tells him to have some backbone, some forbearance, yeah? For a good reason, because he's experiencing the fruits of his karma in this life. And kind of, I don't mean this in any metaphysical way or in any technical sense, but he's burning up his karma, you might say, which in a way is just experiencing the fruit of his karma. You know, we do things sometimes and we like to avoid, we don't want the payback. You know, we say a certain thing, we do a certain thing, but there's always a payback somehow. It kind of comes back. I don't mean in any weird sense, it just happens. We become the kind of person. So he bears it, and understands what's going on. Yeah, he understands. There's no blame. He's not blaming the villagers. He understands why they're attacking him. And then he takes himself into the forest, and it says he experiences the bliss of release. Yeah, so it's like that's quite extraordinary. He's been attacked by the villagers, goes into the forest and experiences the bliss of release. Yeah, maybe it's an elaboration of his already unfolding enlightenment. Yeah, kind of another letting go of hatred, retaliation, resentment, all this gone. Yeah, and I'll end with some final words from Angulimala. Yeah, where he says, he was once one who was heedless, but later, no, he says, who once was heedless, but later is not, brightens the world like a moon set free from a cloud. His evil done deed is replaced with skillfulness. He brightens the moon like the moon set free from a cloud. May even my enemies hear talk of the Dharma. May even my enemies devote themselves to the Buddha's bidding. May even my enemies associate with those people who, peaceful and good, help others to accept the Dharma. May even my enemies hear the Dharma time and again from those who advise endurance, forbearance, who praise non-opposition, and may they follow it. For surely he wouldn't harm me or anyone else. He would attain the foremost peace and would protect the feeble and the firm alike. Some tame with a blunt stick, with hooks and with whips, but without blunt or bladed weapons, I was tamed by the one who is such. Sorry. A bandit I used to be, renowned as Angulimala. Swept along by a great flood, I went to the Buddha as refuge. Bloody-handed I used to be, renowned as Angulimala. See my going for refuge. Uprooted is craving, the guide to becoming. Having done the type of karma that would lead to many bad destinations, touched by that fruit of that karma, unindebted I eat my food. This has come well and not gone away. It was not badly thought through by me. From among well-analyzed qualities, I have obtained the best. This has come well and not gone away. It was not badly thought through by me. The three knowledges have been attained. The Buddha's bidding is done.